My Govanen. Welcome to the Tolkien Lore Channel. I'm the Tolkien Geek, and in this video I want to address what may be the only kind of plot hole left in The Lord of the Rings by J.R.R. Tolkien, and that is the question of what did Gandalf exactly plan to do to get into Mordor? We never really get an answer to that question, and it's a really interesting question to ponder, so let's take a look at it. So first, let's talk about the setup here. At the end of the Council of Elrond, when Frodo decides to speak up and basically volunteer to be the ring bearer, Elrond says, "If I have heard everything right, then I think this task is appointed to you, and if you don't find a way, then no one will." In the movie, of course, that latter line goes to Galadriel much later in the movie, but here it's Elrond's line. So at that point, you already get the idea that it seems hopeless. And of course, they've already discussed it in the Council of Elrond, which in the book is a much longer ordeal. There's a lot of back and forth, and they basically all kind of come to this conclusion that it seems impossible. But Gandalf basically makes the point, it may seem impossible, but we don't know that it's impossible, and we have to do something. Therefore, this is really our option. And Elrond, of course, makes kind of the same point. Together, they basically say to the council, look, this has to be done. It's the only real option. We can't send it, we can't just throw it into the sea because then Sauron will eventually just get powerful enough to overrun us. We can't use it against him because then it'll corrupt whoever uses it. We can't send it to Valinor in the west because they won't take it. There's really no option other than to try to destroy it, even though that seems impossible. And Gandalf basically makes the point that despair is for those who see the end beyond all doubt. We don't see the end beyond all doubt. But he never, and nor does Elrond, ever say anything conclusive about, oh yeah, I totally know how we can get to Mordor. And then we get another kind of reference to this idea that there's no concrete plan after Moria, because in the wake of Gandalf's death, Aragorn ends up saying, I don't know that Gandalf had any real specific plans after Moria. And even before Moria, one of the hobbits asks Gandalf, what comes after we get through, get over the mountains? Well, and he basically says, well, he kind of gives some general description of how you get, beyond that and then to the end, basically is what he says. He never says anything specific about how he's going to get there. So there's never any clear plan laid out of how to make it to Mordor and into Mordor specifically. And this is interesting because what we see in the subsequent chapters is that Mordor seems virtually impossible to get into. And the first indication we really have of that is when Frodo and Sam and Gollum come to the Black Gate. The Black Gate is closed, and it's seemingly impossible to enter unless you know some secret password that the servants of Sauron know so as to get the door open and then sneak in. But even then, if you did, you would soon be found out for not really being on Sauron's side, and that probably wouldn't work out too well. So there's apparently no way into the Black Gate. The only other way that Gollum knows of is Cirith Ungol. And now that gets interesting in its own right, because when Faramir finds out that that's where they're going, he basically says to Frodo, don't go that way. And he even says, I don't think Gandalf would want you to go that way. Faramir may or may not know any reason why Gandalf would necessarily think that, but he turns out to be right. Because Gandalf later in The Return of the King, when he learns from Faramir which way they've gone, in a conversation with Pippin, he basically says, why did they go that way, basically. So you get the idea that Gandalf is none too happy about the situation either. So the one kind of subtle hint that we have that these are not the only two options is Faramir's line to Gollum in the book, where Gollum says basically it's the only way. And Faramir says, how do you know it's the only way? Have you searched the entirety of all the mountains surrounding Mordor? Which of course Gollum hadn't. Nobody I'm sure has, but it's the only two ways known really into Mordor is through the Black Gate and through the Cirith Ungol Pass, or the Minas Morgul Pass, which are kind of the same thing. They're right together. I mean, it's still the same general area. You have to go right next to Minas Morgul, which is really dangerous. So anyway, the whole setup here is basically leading us to believe that getting into Mordor seems basically impossible. So how would Gandalf have actually solved that problem? Let's see if we can tease something out. So there's only two known ways into Mordor. At least that's what I said. There is a third known way into Mordor, but that requires going all the way around to the east into the back end where there's no mountain ranges. How is that defended? We don't know. The point never really comes up in the book. But that means it at least is a potential option. So we know that there are three ways into Mordor. There's the Black Gate, seemingly impassable. Cirith Ungol or Minas Morgul, whichever route you want to take, extremely dangerous. And then there's the back way, which would take a lot of time. Now, of course, there is a fourth theory out there, which I will not name, but which I have done a video on. One does not simply fly into Mordor. You can check that out in the link below for why that doesn't make any sense. Some people have theorized that Gandalf's plan was to get close to Mordor and then, use a certain type of specific animal to get in. That just doesn't fly. At any rate, we're left with three known options. Would going to the back end really have worked? Probably not. It's very much emphasized throughout the story by Gandalf and others that what hope they have is in secrecy and speed. They need to get the job done quickly, and they need to get it done, without being detected. The longer they make the trip, the worse it is, just in terms of speed, and also the more likely they are to be detected. So you don't want to take the long way around if you can avoid it, especially because going around the long way means going right into Sauron's camp, basically, because everything to the east is, if not directly under Sauron's control, at least heavily influenced by Sauron. The Easterlings and the Southrons, those are the two groups of men that we hear about that aren't good guys. Easterlings basically being anything to the east of, the westernmost walls of Mordor, and then the Southrons being the Haradrim. So there doesn't seem to be much hope in taking the long way, especially because if you take the long way, you may end up being too late. At some point, if Sauron does enough damage, even if you destroy the ring, there's not really much left of Middle-earth to save. So that leaves the other two options, Minas Morgul / Cirith Ungol and the Black Gate. Did Gandalf have any idea how to get past the Black Gate? Probably not. I seriously doubt it. Did Aragorn have any ideas? He certainly doesn't mention any. And Aragorn is the one person that we know has traveled, and probably Gandalf too, but certainly Aragorn traveled within the confines of Mordor while he was looking for Gollum. So if anybody would know how to get into Mordor beyond, the apparently impassable Black Gate and Cirith Ungol, there's really nobody else that might have had a better idea. And yet he doesn't give us any indication that he has an idea. So it doesn't seem like there's any known way into Mordor that would, get past the seemingly impenetrable Black Gate. That leaves the Minas Morgul and Cirith Ungol option. But as Faramir tells Frodo, if that pass is named among lore masters and older men, they will basically they won't even talk about it. It's that bad. Now, of course, what are they worrying about? Nazgul or Shelob? Maybe both. But for whatever reason, men in Gondor who had enough learning or enough memory knew very well that that was a very dangerous road to take. Now, could Frodo and Sam have gotten past it without incident if Gollum had not been treacherous? Possibly so, but that doesn't change the fact that it's still a dangerous route to take. So there don't seem to be a lot of good options. Gandalf certainly doesn't seem to like the idea of Cirith Ungol. That seems to be one that he positively would not have liked based on his comments to Pippin. So we're left with, he doesn't want to go to Cirith Ungol. Nobody seems to know a way through the Black Gate, and going the long way around, too dangerous and too long. How then to do it? Well, theoretically, you could just search the mountains for another pass, although you would think if there was another pass, it would have been known, because at one time, of course, the kings of Gondor had, after the ouster of Sauron at the end of the Second Age, they built the Black Gate, or wasn't called the Black Gate then, I'm sure, but they built that, and they built Minas Ithil, which became known as Minas Morgul, and Cirith Ungol, the Tower of Cirith Ungol, at the height of their power to keep a watch on the land of Mordor. So you would think if they had all this ability to build these towers and things, they would have already kind of searched out and found any other readily usable ways to get into Mordor, and yet there's no reference to any of this anywhere. Doesn't mean there weren't any or that none had been discovered, but it seems somewhat unlikely. So what then was Gandalf's plan? Well, I have an idea, and it brings us full circle. So we come back to the idea that Elrond had at the very beginning, where he says, if you do not find a way, then no one will. Did he mean that literally? Perhaps not, but I think that does kind of give us an idea of what Gandalf might or might not have had in mind. You get the idea that nobody really knows how to get into Mordor. It's not a known quantity, but Gandalf advises us that despair is for those who see the end beyond all doubt, and we don't. Aragorn's comment that Gandalf didn't probably have a clear plan beyond getting, close to Mordor, or at least through Moria, seems to be fairly authoritative. They certainly had a lot of discussions about where their road would take them, and we get that in the book in a couple of places. So if Aragorn didn't know of any specific plan that Gandalf had, then he probably didn't have a specific plan. Now that's interesting, because what does one usually do when one has no specific plan? Aimlessly wander? Maybe, but in this particular case, in Lord of the Rings, we have multiple references to Providence. And this goes back again to what Elrond said. The first part of what he said was, I think this task has been appointed to you, he tells Frodo. If it's been appointed by somebody, and that somebody is apparently somebody who wants to see the task achieved. Now, that being the case, we have Providence entering the picture. And of course, Providence is a fairly strong theme throughout Lord of the Rings. You can pick it up in many different places, and Tolkien himself made it fairly explicit in a few of his letters, different points at which Providence plays a role. The eagle's intervention is, of course, in some cases providential, maybe all cases. Gollum biting Frodo's finger off and taking the ring with him into the fire was also an act of Providence, according to Tolkien. There's a lot of different things playing in as far as Providence goes. And so Gandalf, being a Maya, probably would have been at least somewhat in touch with the idea that if this is really the path we're supposed to take, then something or someone will make sure that that path has a reachable end. So the fact that he had no clear plan probably indicates that he just knows that he has to do the job of actually getting as far as he can and let Providence take care of the rest. And in fact, that's basically what happens, because when Frodo and Sam run into Gollum and Gollum takes them to Cirith Ungol, he tries to use that against them to get the ring back, but it works out because Frodo and Sam do get into Mordor. Sam does rescue Frodo from the Tower of Cirith Ungol, and they do eventually make it to Mount Doom. So even without Gollum intervening, that never would have happened. Frodo and Sam would likely have never made it into Mordor, and if they tried, they would have been captured. So there's this very clear picture that Providence is definitely playing a role. How that role would have played out if Gandalf had survived and led the company past Moria, we can't really say, but it does seem pretty clear that Providence is making sure that the task appointed to Frodo is going to get completed. And Frodo even mentions this too. He actually tells Sam while they're wandering around in the Emyn Muil, before they run into Gollum, he says, I think I am doomed to go, to yonder. He doesn't name it, but he's pointing to Mordor. Doomed in the old sense of fated, or, it's basically decreed. To doom something means to decree it or make it, a decision, basically. And that word gets used a few times in The Lord of the Rings in that way. It's not the more modern sense of we're doomed, it's all going to, end badly. That's not what Frodo means. He means I am fated to end up there. So you get these hints along the way that somehow, some way, it's going to work out. If Gandalf had survived, would they have still run into Gollum in the same way and ended up doing the same thing? Not really clear. Gandalf certainly doesn't like the idea of going to Cirith Ungol, so if he had been with Frodo and Sam at the time, it seems like he would have tried to find a different way about it. But at the end of the day, his trust is in Providence. And so I don't think he had a clear plan. I think he knew rather that the goal had to be striven for, and the way to complete it, which was not clear at the time, would in some way be made clear such that the task could be completed. That, I think, is really the only solid answer we can come up with. Gandalf didn't have a plan. He had a goal, and he knew that the goal had to be striven for to the extent possible, and the rest would be up to Iluvatar, the Valar, whatever role is being played by Providence there. So I think that's really the only conclusion that one can reach, but it's an interesting question because it does highlight that particular theme in The Lord of the Rings. So I hope you enjoyed that video and the way it kind of led into a bit of a thematic discussion. I think that's pretty interesting. If you have more information than I do at my fingertips, it's been a while since I read the earlier versions of The Lord of the Rings and whatnot in the History of Middle-earth collection, but if you know of a tidbit that I might have overlooked, then please do mention that in the comments, and if you have your own theories, then share those as well. If you like the video, please do give it a thumbs up, share it around, and if you'd like to follow me on Twitter, you can do that at JRRTLore, and you can check out a couple of my previous videos here, and you can subscribe by pressing this button over here. Until next time, I'm the Tolkien Geek signing out for the Tolkien Lore channel. Namaste.